Kia ora, and welcome to our first talk of the Connect and Develop series for 2025. I'm Peter Papagiannis, Alumni Relations Manager here at the University of Auckland. It's great to have you all here today as we talk about how to build a future-ready career in a world where society, technology, and our environments are rapidly evolving. Our speaker is University of Auckland alumnus, 40 under 40 recipient, food technology entrepreneur, Alex Worker. And joining Alex today is our MC, Ludmila Burrow. Ludmila has taken a non-linear career path spanning different countries and industries with a foundation in occupational therapy and education. She has devoted much of her career to tertiary education, focusing on mentoring, coaching, teaching, and facilitation. Starting at the University of Auckland as a career consultant, her curiosity for entrepreneurial careers inspired her recent move into the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, where she is a program advisor. On behalf of all of us here at the university, I'd like to say many thanks to Alex and Ludmila for being a part of this series, and a warm thank you to everyone who has logged on today, all the way from Norway to New York. Over to you, Ludmila.
Thank you so much, Peter. Great to be here with everyone from New Zealand, Norway, and New York. I wish every single one of my lunch breaks was this exciting. Before I start introducing Alex, I want to cover a few tips for participating in today's webinar. The Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom panel is now live. So please submit your questions at any point during the webinar, and we'll be monitoring them as we go. I also encourage you to upvote the questions you find the most interesting, and these questions will move to the top of the Q&A section. Towards the end of today's webinar, Alex will be answering some of the highest rated questions. And now on to introducing today's speaker. Alex Worker is a visionary food entrepreneur. He's the co-founder of Nutrition from Water, Lilo Desserts, and Future Food Aotearoa. He has played a pivotal role in launching and building Impossible Foods across New Zealand and the Asia-Pacific region, and currently serves as the chair of Future Food Aotearoa, is an Imagine leader, and a member of Class 15 at Think School Amsterdam. Alex believes that new technologies are essential in addressing the challenges of population growth and climate change, and I'm really excited to learn more about his mission to turn Aotearoa into the Eco Valley for the South Pacific. We're so grateful to have Alex here with us today, and we would really like to look together with him at how we can all equip ourselves with the skills and mindset for a successful career now and into the future. Alex, over to you.
Thanks, Ludmila. Real pleasure to be here, everybody, and thanks for joining. Thanks for the introduction too, and I think it's really important, firstly, to shout out University of Auckland. I did my honours year many moons ago at the business school that had just recently opened, and I've done a number of studies since that, right? In China, at MIT, at Oxford, and at Think. But that year I had at the was one of the best years I can remember in terms of the academic foundations. And so, if anyone is here still studying at University of Auckland, do know that you're at an excellence factory. And I think it's really important to promote excellence at the moment, and really to turbocharge the best ideas in New Zealand and then from New Zealand. So really, I think I've got about 10 minutes to maybe scene set from some of my perspectives on one, how to think about, your own pathways and developing future roles. But really, my background and where I'm at today is very much involved in what I call modern or future food. So I started my career after University of Auckland, joining Fonterra and worked there for 10 years through a corporate executive program and ended up in China. And I really liked my years in China because they really taught me that, it's great to sit in New Zealand and talk strategy and trade, but really you understand where markets and trends are moving by understanding the consumer or having that first-hand insight as to what people want or where things are moving. And so I went to China, and through a number of different things, ended up with Fonterra building farms there. They ended up being scuttled. But when we were building these farms, there was a big pool of cash that came from Fonterra farmers in New Zealand, and it was one of our big plays at the time. And actually, the strategy wasn't really working out that well, so we went in to really steady the ship. And when we were building these farms, the Chinese government at the time made us price in all the externalities. And when we priced in these externalities, so that's paying for the water to the farms, the effluent that leaves the farms and the cows, the GHGs or the methane exposure, and building biodigesters to capture the methane from the farms. When we built and priced in all these externalities on these industrial dairy farms in China, the milk price that we had forecasted didn't make a lot of sense. And then, a number of years later, we ended up stopping the farming program and then ending up selling these farms. And so one of my key insights at that time in China was, if we're trying to feed the world or feed China and feed people really good nutrition, if you pay for the fully loaded externalities onto that milk price, it doesn't make a lot of economic sense, let alone environmental sense. So I left that chapter and left Fonterra. I wouldn't say disillusioned, but really looking at, well, how do we use technology to feed better nutrition to people that deserve it? And my view is everybody deserves access to affordable nutrition. And so I met at the time Nick Heller, who was employee number 1 at Impossible Foods. That was really the beginning of scaling food technology globally, where venture capital about 10 years ago got interested in the food thematic. More recently, they've got less interested because no one's made the quick money on food technology like you can in SaaS. But so I joined Impossible Foods out of Hong Kong and helped Nick and the Impossible Foods team build across Asia Pacific from the US. And really, Impossible had this unique technology platform where they'd raised about $2 billion to develop soy-derived hemoglobin. So it's essentially a heme equivalent that runs through your blood. They worked out how to develop that from the nodes of a soya crop, and you then ferment that and turn it into the base, and you add that base of heme with plant-based ingredients to mimic sensory feeling of eating meat. And so we took that technology across Asia Pacific just before COVID. And it was a lot of fun in ways, but there were also lots of challenges. And two of my key insights were, one, when you're taking a very expensive technology across markets, you end up just feeding the top of the pyramid, right? The rich, or people that can afford this new technology, and not perhaps the people that need it most. We weren't accessing the millions in Indonesia or in Southern Asia. It was really sitting in Hong Kong and Singapore and the markets that could afford this technology first. And the second key insight was to really scale affordable nutrition. Having genetically engineered new technologies from food, that soy hemoglobin, it was really hard to put that across borders. And it's mainly to do with regulations and under this new era of protectionism, governments and countries really like owning their own technology stack and are less inviting to new technologies trying to disrupt existing markets. So I left Impossible after 4.5 years, having set it up in New Zealand with the support of Air New Zealand and a number of key partners here domestically. Both intrigued with the idea of food technology that do good both for planet, but most importantly for people, but really also still wondering, well, what's New Zealand's future in food, right? If we don't have the $2 billion to invest in the next Impossible Foods, what is our right to play or right to win in food? And so that's, for the next 5 minutes, I might just quickly touch on, and then we'll open up for the conversation with Lumila and yourselves, right? Please use the Q&A. Is really, what's New Zealand's food future, right? Because New Zealand, we're a young nation, but we've really, we've had people on this country or these islands now for over 1,000 years. And over the last 100 years, we've got relatively rich from farming and traditional primary industries and exporting a lot of that product. We're mainly going to like the United Kingdom. And then in the 1970s, with the UK joining the EEC, the French kindly blocked or vetoed a lot of our exports. And so then from the 70s through to more recently, the last 40 years, 50 years, we had to move a lot of our food exports into Asia. And it was actually quite fortunate for us, right? I mean, it still took a lot of pioneering, trading, and business building, but we really moved from feeding the UK and parts of Europe to really being on the doorstep of Asia and feeding Asia. So we've done quite well to date of traditional primary industries, dairy, logs, beef, and other traditional produce. And today, if you kind of play that out, we're doing about $56 billion worth of exports. That's well over 2/3 of New Zealand's revenue or cash that we get for exporting. Now, that's a good thing, right? Because New Zealand has prospered because of that. It accounts for about 10% of our economy today, 12% of jobs in New Zealand connected to food and fibers. The challenge is a lot of what we've done to get us here isn't going to help necessarily New Zealand prosper going forward. And what I mean by that is the challenge New Zealand has is we've got all this, lovely produce, but, back to my insights of building farms in China, when you factor in the true externalities of producing, industrial dairy in New Zealand and how that impacts our waterways, and how do you choose to price water to then supply to these farms to then do intensive dairy? When you start revisiting this model, particularly when moving it towards a net positive model, with the idea of everything we're doing in New Zealand actually adds to our environment rather than detracts from it. Because if New Zealand's play is, mostly around its natural capital, how do we do, more things with less that actually then build on our opportunity rather than take from it? And so if you're thinking like that, and that's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is what are the new plays, or what are the new technologies in food from New Zealand that can go into Asia and the UK and the US? And where does New Zealand have a right to play, or in business speak, a right to win in? Where can we actually really compete with the best coming out of Israel or Denmark or China or Singapore or the US? And so I'm not here saying we can do everything, right? We're a very small country at the bottom of the world, but we can do a lot more in the space of food and climate technology. And my suggestion here is to this audience is, when you're thinking about future roles and you're interested in food and fibers, think about food technology. And maybe I'll just give a couple examples of what I'm seeing or what I'm involved in. So since Impossible, we set up 2 companies. One's called Nutrition from Water, and that's really a biotechnology business, started in New Zealand, now in Portugal, building with global customers, the equivalents to Fonterras from other parts of the world, mainly in dairy nutrition and affordable nutrition. And we realized that, New Zealand's a small country landmass, right? But we're actually one of the largest water territories in the world. I think we're 8th largest in our EEZ. And if you look into water, there's all the stuff you can't see in water that's incredibly fascinating in the nutrition world, and that's called microscopic algae. University of Auckland's doing some cool stuff there, and Cawthorne Institute in Nelson has New Zealand's and the Pacific Ocean's largest strain library of microscopic algae. And we've just realized that through using our technology designed in New Zealand, that we can actually not only ferment microscopic algae, but then in a brewing type of Heineken or beer process with large industrial bioreactors, you can then process microalgae similar to what you can dairy, and you can isolate proteins, complete nutrition, fibers, and other specialized ingredients, and then sell that back to global nutrition companies, just like Fonterra does today in dairy. So Nutrition Water is a New Zealand, or started in New Zealand, now global technology company that we're growing with venture capital and some New Zealand government support. And there are many more companies like Nutrition from Water in this space, including Daisy Lab, that's doing precision fermented dairy proteins in New Zealand. Opo Bio, which is actually, I think, co-founded by University of Auckland scientists and ex-alum, and a number of other food technology companies that are all building from New Zealand. And then one other company I'm involved with is called Lilo Desserts, and that's really the insight. New Zealand's done really well exporting perfect fruit around the world. Zespri, cherries, apples, you name it. The challenge with a lot of perfect fruit is it's, particularly with the onset of climate change and really seasonal variability, it means it's harder to keep the fruit perfect. And so really what we saw 6 years ago when working around Asia was how do you make the most of fruit waste or upcycled fruit? Because if our orchardists across New Zealand can, instead of thinking perfect fruit the whole time, if they can create business models for imperfect fruit that have higher value and that can leave New Zealand, then you can build a steady cash flow business around your waste fruit or your imperfect fruit. And then when you do have a bumper season with lots of perfect fruit, that becomes your profit kicker. So in short, Lilo Desserts, we design exportable dairy desserts, non-dairy desserts, and shortly dairy desserts that use New Zealand fruit. And that's really, that wouldn't leave the orchard otherwise. And we manufacture in Christchurch, and we put onto planes in Air New Zealand and United and Air China now that leaves New Zealand. And we're now starting to export that model, that fruit model and that processing and brand model into Singapore, Australia, and the United States. So those are a couple of examples of future food businesses that I'm personally involved with. But what I would steer, maybe for the last couple of minutes here before we open up for conversation, is there's a real challenge currently in the New Zealand marketplace, and that's because particularly after COVID, there's almost been this cost out focus. So at least in the food world, not a lot of people investing in innovation or R&D today. It's really just investing to hang on. So that means, with people wanting to spend less, that products aren't actually being that innovative. They're really innovating on cost to be cheaper. And so that's cool in the short term. But, the challenge for New Zealand going forward is, how do we make some big bets? Like what we did with kind of moving dairy into Asia 40, 50 years ago. How do we make some big bets today on future food technologies built or designed in New Zealand, and then that can be exported and licensed beyond New Zealand into other behind border markets? And so what that means is maybe not the whole product is always made and manufactured in New Zealand. Maybe it started in New Zealand, and then maybe the model is licensed, or the brand or the technology is licensed to the US or China, and then partners in those markets then manufacture under license. And so that whole model that used to be what's done in New Zealand is exported from New Zealand, and you kind of say goodbye at the doorstep to your consumer market is completely changing. And I think that presents a fantastic opportunity for anybody that's really thinking about either to learn new skills or to study or to reskill, because fundamentally it's a business model shift that's playing out right now. And in food, right? Food and fibers are still going to be a very big industry for New Zealand. It's one of our right to wins for our future revenue. But the challenge is it's a completely new paradigm for growth. It's, farmers, for example, there's half as many farmers and farms now today in New Zealand than there were 50 years ago. And that trend isn't looking like it's going to change anytime soon. There's fantastic opportunity here in New Zealand to build new food technology companies, but we do need to invest in R&D, and we do need to invest in science and STEM and track people that are as good anywhere in the world, but that want to be here and build new things. And then I think, perhaps most importantly is we need to foster greater collaboration as a people between our higher areas of learning, like University of Auckland, but also our research institutes, our CRIs. So the question is, how do we allow great scientists to think and ponder and play? And then how do we commercialize, those great ideas once they're ready quickly beyond New Zealand? And that's where we need to design for new models of growth that take a bit more venture funding or risk capital, but also require much more and greater partnership with parties beyond our New Zealand ecosystem for growth. So it's not always going to Fonterra's doorstep to help us grow. It might be going to a Nestle or a Cargill or somebody from a mid-tier city in India or China that really understands what we're trying to grow and can help us and do it faster. So there's a whole future in food ahead, and I'm really happy to open up for questions and explore some of this in greater detail. Cheers.
Alex, thank you so much. I really loved the moment when you said that there is a whole future in food and you smiled broadly, which I take as a sign that despite the challenges, the future is looking bright. I just wanted to recap what you said, and there were so many gold nuggets that I was writing down. You started with the idea of excellence and how important it is now. And I think all that you've done so far and that you're working on really embodies that, and also how excellence can be combined with being mission and values driven. I particularly liked how you were talking about access and contribution to equity and how everybody everywhere deserves good nutrition, and how starting with the most expensive cutting edge tech solutions may not benefit the people that you originally intended to benefit with your mission. The importance of collaboration and what I would call a science-rooted or a science-informed economy, and how global orientation can still remain locally anchored, from thinking how you use fruit to where to from here. I just want to remind our audience, I can see questions are starting to come in. Wonderful. Please send them through and also upvote them. We can't possibly ask all the questions. So if you feel like somebody's asked a great question, feel free to upvote. Being the MC, I've got so many questions, but don't worry. It's not just about what I've got on my list and in my mind. We'll get to yours. One thing that I would like to ask you, Alex. So obviously, changing and creating sustainable food systems sounds like not the easiest industry to be in. What makes you persist, persevere, believe that the future is bright? What are you telling yourself when things get tough?
Yeah, great question, right? And I deal with this daily at the moment because it's really hard to scale businesses beyond New Zealand from New Zealand, right? So I spend about 50% of my time on, at the back of an airplane, right? Nothing glorious, between San Francisco, Portugal, China, India, Dubai. And so, I struggle personally with how do I be a present dad at home at the same time getting pulled into scaling these businesses. And then, on the business side, how do I actually fund these businesses? Because, what it kind of made light on is food technology started with a hiss and a roar. But over the last 5 years, there's been a bit of a reckoning where, investors have realized food technology isn't a, go big and win approach on the investment portfolio theory. It's actually a much harder, capital intensive, almost like rather than an acceleration, it's like a staged or stair shaped investment growth pathway. So it means that at every stage you're trying to grow, you require more funding or more support. And so, what I play with is how to grow companies from New Zealand that will benefit New Zealand and our future in the Asia Pacific region, but that might not necessarily always be based in New Zealand. And it's a hard one to play with, right? Because in a way, I want the New Zealand lifestyle. I want to see my kids more. And at the same time, I want to grow new technology, new revenue for New Zealand. And so with one of the companies, I've actually had to flip that company. It started in New Zealand and now it's an American business with a Portuguese subsidiary. And now suddenly NZTE and the New Zealand ecosystem isn't actively supporting me as much on this journey, because now suddenly we're not a New Zealand entity, even though we're still partnered with New Zealand research institutes. We're commercializing New Zealand science, and we're scaling with New Zealand distributors who already buy Fonterra product, and now they're buying our Marine Way. So it's a long way of saying I grapple with your question, Lumila, but I think it comes back to your why. And my why, my parents were members of either government or public good, and they always trained me to think about this idea that New Zealand's a fantastic place to live, to raise family, and that really has the right kind of values, right, down at a community level. And so what I'm interested in doing from wearing my business hat is trying to make sure there's new revenue coming into our local communities that allow New Zealand to prosper. And if that means that I have to go away for a few years to go and build up that new revenue to then bring it back, I think that's really just part of the journey. And I do think, though, if there's one message I can pass to people is don't discount what you do in New Zealand, because it is as good as doing it elsewhere. It's as good as doing it in Shanghai. It's as good as doing it in New York. Excellence in New Zealand is excellent anywhere. But at the same time, my recommendation I'd urge you is don't validate yourself by sitting in New Zealand. Validate yourself and your excellence by taking your good idea or your big smile or your team to Tel Aviv or to New York or to London, and consistently validate your assumptions or your lifestyle or your business in New Zealand with the very best elsewhere. Because if you can do that and then straddle the two, I think that's really the future of New Zealand, right? It's listening to our consumers, it's listening to our customers, but at the same time, with humility, helping them recognize and understand more about New Zealand, particularly around our environment and our natural capital.
Alex, thank you so much for this answer. I think what I'm really appreciating in your answer is how you frame going elsewhere. It's not simply growth for the sake of growth or being bigger, better, cooler, but validating these assumptions. And I think when I was doing some research on you before this webinar, you are often being called visionary. I can totally see why, because you sustain that vision and constantly validate it. We have some excellent questions coming in. Thank you so much, everyone. Keep them coming. The most upvoted one, not surprising, people want advice. From a visionary, what advice do you have for students who want to have a career in impact and impactful work that can help New Zealand and also help save the planet? I think, Alex, I'll also ask you, if possible, to frame that advice in terms of today's topic, future-proof career, whatever that means. We use that term a lot, but what is actually future-proof career? And what advice do you have for our students?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? I wish I had a golden bullet but maybe part of the answer is have a few bullets, right? No one ever knows. If I could say that you had one target and you had one bullet and you knew you're going to hit the target, just do that, right? And there are some people that are lucky enough to have that. They want to be a doctor. They know they're going to make an amazing doctor. They study hard to be a doctor. They are a doctor. Amazing, well done. I'm definitely not that school, right? I didn't really know what I wanted, but I knew what I didn't want. So I went through a process of closing doors. And then there's kind of this balance. What I'd recommend is, use your time at university to play, right? Play with ideas, play with projects. hang out with cool people or people that you wouldn't usually hang out with. Hang out with the engineers or hang out with the artists. Learn, play, and try to do as much as you can. Don't worry too much about whether a Deloitte or a Fonterra is going to care about your CV. My recommendation would be throw yourself into whatever you're doing and have fun, because it's a special chapter of life. That being said, my recommendation would be, particularly in this kind of workforce and this climate we're in, is maybe don't spend too much time playing before you get a few punches in your face. And what I mean by that is go out and do some work, right? That could be your side hustles, could be setting up a business during university, could be doing your internships, it could be doing, maybe just concurrent work and study. But go out and get some skills from the real world, or it can be a boring job, it can be a really exciting job. In my view, it doesn't really matter. It's just what you're starting to do is calibrate your idealism from playing in the ivory tower with the realities of got to get paid, what do people want, and deep down you're not that interesting until you are. So I remember, my first years at Fonterra, whereas literally, I went in there thinking I was a lot, and you go right down the back of the it's starting day one primary school all over again, and you do all the really boring jobs, but you learn to do the boring jobs well. And I remember at about 2.5 years into Fonterra, I kept asking to go to China or go to Latin America and learn about what the consumer was wanting from our dairy product at the time. And I kept being told, do your time, sit in Auckland, do your time, sit in Auckland. And I realized after a while that that person or that manager or that boss didn't necessarily see the world like I did. And it's not their fault and it's not my fault. It's just a different generational view. And so I made a decision to leave Fonterra at the time, to go to China to do an MBA, to go see that consumer. And so I suppose part of my message here to everybody is go and get some real world experience after the ivory tower, whatever field that is. It doesn't really matter. But if you do have a calling, as you're learning in the workspace around what you want to do next, chase it actively. And it might be, doing corporate, and that's fine. It might be setting up a business straight away, and that's totally fine as well. All I'd urge is, if you feel like you've got that calling to go do something that's you rather than somebody else telling you to do something, please go and do it. And then my last point would be, I hope, because you, in a way, leaving university, it probably doesn't feel like you have the space and the luxury, but you do have this magic period of time where you can try things in the real world or in business or in your profession. And you can take probably greater risk than you otherwise can when you're juggling incomes for your family, or you've got less energy as an older person like me. So all I'd say is, if you are inclined to take risk and you do see yourself wanting to set up a business leaving university, please go and do it, because New Zealand needs more of that. We need to take more risks. We need to build more ideas. And once they're working, we need to get them beyond New Zealand. And my hope is, over the coming decade or two, we're going to have more ecosystem support around New Zealand, supporting entrepreneurs, those putting in risk capital to get those ideas beyond New Zealand.
Alex, thank you. Thank you for giving such a practical approach to thinking about careers. I guess if I may summarize it, it sounds to me like very much like building a business, almost like ideate, validate, calibrate. And validate and calibrate, these were actually the words that you used. Play, as Alex said, ideate, see what may work. If you have a calling, go for it. Decoupling excellence from passion, doing well in a job that may appear boring to start with. Validate, see what works, see what doesn't, try different hypotheses. And finally, calibrate. After you know what doesn't work, you can actually change something. The next question that's been on people's mind is about policies. Something tells me you'll enjoy talking about this, Alex. What policies do you think the government could enact to better help the newer food technology companies expand into the markets that you mentioned? While we do have a comparative advantage in the dairy industry, do you think there's anything we can do to further grow it? So dairy or other industries, food technology, let's think broadly. How would a new entrant work in this quiet, saturated space?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot there, right? I'll try and keep it to a couple of minutes on a couple of points. So, for example, in future food or modern food, there's a big policy debate going on right now around genetically engineered ingredients technologies being welcome into New Zealand. And our current government's trying to push that through. And if that's accepted and passed, what that means is, companies like Daisy Lab or some, precision fermentation, where you're developing dairy-like identical proteins. There'll be, I think, a lot of opportunity in the workplace for new jobs in these kind of companies and this sector. So that's one to watch, I think, quite actively in New Zealand. And that would be following similar what's happened in Australia the last 3 to 5 years, under Fazan's copycat, and what's happened in the UK, China, and the US. A lot of developed nations now are saying yes to enabling genetically engineered technologies to further food, just like they have pharmaceuticals over the past 20, 30 years. So watch the GE space, CRISPR, and then what that means for business in modern food. I think like another point would be quickly to say, almost on the other end of the spectrum, don't wait for government. I think New Zealand's kind of got a little bit stuck in its way over the past 10 years, where we keep thinking business follows government. And I think there's a lot of challenges with that type of logic now, where our government doesn't have a lot of money today. So it's moving increasingly into a reactive space rather than a proactive space, right? Creaking healthcare, creaking infrastructure, the hollowing out of the middle. There's a lot of pressing problems for government to try to mitigate, let alone manage, over the coming 5 to 10 years. So when you're talking about like new industry, new technology, new space, please do not wait for policy. Instead, with a little bit of Kiwi can-do type of mentality, if you see an opportunity that you think policy might catch up with in 3, 5, 10, 20 years' time, please go and build that today. Build it as a private enterprise or a not-for-profit. Prove it out. And then, if you're right and, your business or your project's right, and it's let then policy and that change of policy come in and be wind in the sails. So yeah, I'll probably stop there, but I think one is, at least in foods, check out the New Zealand GE bill. That's a live debate at the moment and should get passed. And there's some still challenges there that we can touch on maybe on another session around GMO and New Zealand's perception and marketing opportunity around this. And then the second point is, I urge you, if you are looking to do something, do it regardless of policy. Don't make sure that you're not in the face of policy going in the wrong direction. That's usually a terrible situation to be in. But go and do it, and then let policy catch up with you. And that might mean doing it beyond New Zealand's borders.
Excellent, Alex. Really made me don't wait for the government, made me think of the historical moment and the JFK famous speech. Think about what you can do for your country. We often at CIE, where I work, we often talk to the students, and when they say someone should do something about this particular problem, the question we ask is, okay, great, why not you? And I think that sort of captures the spirit of what you said. I've got lots of questions, but I only have the time to ask the most upvoted one, and you will have about 3 minutes to address a really big question. One person wrote, and quite a few people upvoted it, I am worried that my job may not be relevant in the future. Me too. How do I stay relevant? Are there skills you think would make me more employable in the future? Or any industries I should be looking to transition into? With industries, might be hard to answer not knowing the person, but what do you think will be the growing industries and areas in the future? We've all heard AI, apart from AI.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's like the AI everything at the moment, right? I would frame that response with again, first point would be, I think expect to reskill or retrain every 5 years. I think that's almost like a given nowadays. And it doesn't mean like going back to university for a 3-year program, right? But it might mean evening courses, or it might mean taking 3 months out between jobs, or 6 months out, or negotiating with your employer or with yourself or your partner, right? Because it does mean it adds burden on maybe your family when you're trying to prioritize your own learning. But negotiate and prioritize I think it's something like every 5 years to refresh, reskill. I think that's a given nowadays. I think there's a second point there saying, is this in New Zealand context or a wider context? And I think New Zealand has a real opportunity, right? Something around being this place where you can come and get, receive great education. You can, travel and live a good life in New Zealand, relatively. And then the question is, well, what can you do in New Zealand that's either special or distinctive? And I think there's a big push at the moment to do, just build tech and industry around technology, whether it's in food or other things. So I would say, prioritize jobs that can relocate, because I think New Zealand should benefit from that, particularly if it's got a tech focus to it. But then on the other side is don't underweight what's tangible. And those could be jobs, like, again, picking up intergenerational businesses. There's a whole generation of people that have worked really hard in New Zealand to build an SME or a small business, and they don't know how to sell these businesses, and they don't know who to trust to take them on and grow them next. So there's a whole opportunity there just to kind of help the generation, before us, to help them transition. And so I would urge you to look at that. And then, I think there's a wonderful opportunity there where, if it's not detracting from our environment, it's maybe a traditional business or a new business, and you can add then new technology to it to make it either more efficient or cleaner, or maximize productivity. There's so much opportunity there. So yeah, I'll just round that out. AI is the kind of the catch-all buzz
Yes.
phrase at the moment, but there's so much more there that factors with what New Zealand's right to win in, putting a bit of smarts in around technology, and then a lot of can-do attitude with kind of mid-generation brokering between those trying to get out and those trying to come in.
Alex, thank you so much for the wisdom, and most importantly for the optimism. I feel quite uplifted. I am ready to upskill, and I hope everyone is as well. Thank you, everybody, for your question and attention. And speaking of upskilling, today was the first webinar of the 2025 series, with 2 more to come later in the year. On the 13th of May, we'll have another 40 under 40 leader, Emma Blomkamp, speaking about co-design. So look out for more details on the website. Make sure to register. I encourage you all to get connected by joining the university's fantastic mentoring platform called Alumni Connect. I'm there as well. Not sure about Alex, but I would encourage everyone to join. Following the link on screen to create a profile, start connecting with others in the university community for career support, advice, guidance, opportunities. There is also a career coach on the platform to provide expert help and advice when you need it. We look forward to seeing all of you in the next talk. Thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day.